If you'd have told me in September that when I flew home from my next rock climbing trip, I'd be leaving part of my leg behind, I'd have said, what on earth happened? I'm Hannah and I'm a rock climber. Or I was. Until now, when this injury, one of the most severe that my surgeons have ever seen, has left me with a pretty long road back to climbing. And a great story to tell. 3 surgeries, a month in hospital, and a leg full of metal later, the last few months have been some of the most challenging of my life. I've been sharing my climbing on this channel for the last 5 years, and I've enjoyed documenting my life since I can remember, really. In truth, I wasn't sure how much of my injury I'd want to share here. It's pretty horrific, and it doesn't really paint climbing in the light that I've grown to know and love it in over the years. But when I received a message from my friends at Mammut, they helped me to see that challenges off the wall are just as important as the challenges we face on the wall, so we've teamed up to tell the story. So I guess we should go back to the accident and actually get into what happened. So earlier this year, I had recently returned to climbing after a period of time off with injury. I'd also recently taken on a big house renovation project, so that was taking up a lot of my time. But something else that me and Nathan were really excited for towards the end of the year was an upcoming trip to the US. We had booked a climbing holiday and our plan was to head out to the US and climb around the US for a little under a month. In the weeks before we left for the USA, I felt like I was getting back to climbing like I had been before my back problem started, and I was feeling a lot more confident in my training sessions. I'd climbed my first yellows at the depot, which probably won't mean anything to anyone. But to me, it was kind of like a real step forwards in my climbing and really signified like getting back to it.
Yes, Hannah.
I had in the back of my mind that it would be really serendipitous for me to ride this wave of confidence and tick off a long-term goal of climbing V8 in the US. So I definitely had that like in the back of my mind. That was a goal. Unfortunately, it was on that trip to the US that I had my accident. I kind of want to give like a warning that I'm going to share some pretty gruesome details of like a traumatic injury. So if you're a little bit squeamish, I'd probably recommend not listening. To answer a question that I've had a bunch, my accident was a bouldering accident and it happened outside. So if you're not familiar with climbing, bouldering is a discipline of climbing where you climb without ropes above crash pads, but you don't climb very high. On the day of my accident, Nathan and I had headed to an outdoor bouldering spot in Berkeley. So I'd been trying this boulder, this V5, and it was such a classic, like, we were approaching lunch. Should I have one last go on this boulder before we go and get lunch? Yeah, I'll have one last go. And like that's something that I've kicked myself about endlessly since my accident happened. Like if I just hadn't had that last go, then obviously I wouldn't have had my accident. But I don't think it's helpful to think that way and be in that mindset, because there's also so much that could have gone more badly wrong, which didn't. But I had one last go, and to my surprise, I was successful and I climbed the boulder. But really simply, I just went to stand up to go and find the down climb. Facing outwards, I just lost my footing. I don't know if I slipped or tripped or what happened, but I lost my balance. And then I just remember falling outwards. And as I was falling, I remember having enough time to kind of think, this is not a good height to be falling from. And it was just this like surreal, like I can't believe that this has just happened. Like I was kind of in a dream. And then I hit the ground, and I so vividly have that memory and the sensation of like hitting the ground and it just being like taking the wind out of me completely. Like I'd never been hit by hard or anything in my life, and just going like completely numb. So when I hit the ground, I think I instinctively like did the full body scan to try and figure out whether or not I was okay. And I looked down at my leg, and I just vividly remember seeing that the bottom half of my right leg was at a right angle to the rest of my leg. So I knew in that moment that I'd probably broken my leg or my ankle. I'd broken both. But I also instinctively had put my hands down to my leg, and they had come away like a mess. I don't know what I can say on YouTube without getting flagged. But I knew that I'd broken my leg. My leg wasn't right. And I knew that I was bleeding. I think at this point my brain just protected me from like what I was seeing. I didn't really compute, and in an instant Nathan, my boyfriend, had run over and had covered my eyes, and I so distinctly remember being like, is it open, is it open, is it open, even though I kind of knew that it was. And Nathan saying, I don't know, like, we'll wait for the ambulance to get here. When you realise that the people around you are trying to protect you from how bad your injury is, it panicked me, because I knew that it was bad enough that Nathan wasn't letting me look. But I don't think I know that I didn't really grasp like the true severity of my injury. In a little bit, I'll show you a drawing of a photo that I was shown later on in the hospital, which kind of like puts into perspective how my leg looked. And then I just remember like screaming like an animal. And I remember thinking I've maybe got about like 5 or 6 good screams to like get this feeling of just being like, this can't be happening, out of my system. But I so distinctly remember thinking, you can't afford to respond this way. You need to get it together and like calm down, because you don't know how long you're going to be lay here for. And also I had like friends around me, and I didn't want to traumatize people more. I was kind of waiting for the pain to hit, and I think at that point I just went into like this like mega practical headspace where I was like ordering people around and being like, has the ambulance been called? We need to take my shoe off because my feet are going to swell. But obviously the people around me had a little bit better of a grasp of like what my leg looked like. Okay, so this is the climbing shoe that I was wearing when I fell. I don't actually really remember too well them cutting it off my foot. I really have no purpose for this shoe, or like use for this shoe anymore, but it was with me at a really like pivotal moment in my climbing journey, so for that reason I've kept it. It still has my blood on the tab. Maybe we should get rid of it. In the time between the ambulance arriving in the time between me falling and the ambulance arriving, we got so incredibly lucky that there was someone at the crag, a complete stranger, who was first aid trained and came over and offered to help. So he got out a bottle of water and was like rinsing out my leg and like propped it up on a backpack. So on the off chance that he is seeing this, I can't thank you enough. In between me hitting the ground and the ambulance arriving was maybe like 5 minutes, like max. But whilst I was lying there, I just remember thinking, no, this like can't have happened. We're so far away from home. I just remember feeling like if I could just control Z, the situation, then I would do. I was in complete disbelief, shock, really didn't want it to be true. I remember kind of like going through all of the steps in my head as to like what the impact was going to be on like my climbing and like whether or not I was going to be able to work. But it never really once occurred to me, as it maybe should have done, that I should be a little bit more worried about the acute risk to my leg. So something that would have been like really morbidly interesting for me to be able to show you, but which I can't on YouTube, is the photographs that were taken of my leg. But this is my artist's interpretation of
the photographs that I was shown in the hospital. So back of my leg, front of my leg, bones. I'd say that this is pretty accurate. I'm not much of an artist. I wasn't shown those photos until a couple of weeks later, and I think when I saw those, despite knowing the injuries that I sustained and despite having seen them at the scene of the accident, I don't think it really hit me until they're just, those images are so like visceral and horrible. It's been 3 and a bit months since my accident, and I wanted to show you my leg. So you can kind of like imagine, I guess you'd call it like an exit wound.
My first real understanding that I was actually in a serious situation was when the EMTs arrived and they started asking me questions. So I remember them talking about 2 things that kind of gave me my first flavour that I might be quite badly hurt or like more seriously hurt. And the first was that they were asking me a lot about sensation in my right foot, and I didn't have any. I couldn't feel my right foot. And they were also talking amongst themselves about arterial bleeding. And I think that was when I first kind of made the connection that there's a lot of important arteries and blood supply in your leg. Because of the height that I'd fallen from, they were also worried about head injury, back injury, spine, neck. So there was a lot going on, but all things considered, I actually felt pretty fine, considering all things considered. I was like chatting, I didn't feel any pain. Like I said, shock is one hell of a drug. Then they loaded me into the ambulance, and I remember thinking on the way to the hospital, like breaking a leg isn't the end of the world. People break their leg all the time. But I didn't know then that my injury was limb threatening, and there was a very real risk that I could lose my leg. So the first few days in the hospital are a little bit of a blur in my memory, probably because I was on some pretty strong painkillers. I was laying in the ER and they cut all of my clothes off, and I basically had like a doctor on each limb asking me about sensation and testing function. And that was, like I say, it was a blur, but I remember being scared, and I remember being cognizant of not being able to feel my leg. As the picture became clear, they began to kind of like update Nathan on the full extent of my injuries, and maybe he began to understand, because I was on a different planet, he began to understand that the injury was a threat to my limb. I had what they call a Pilon Fracture.
A Pilon fracture is a severe break of the ankle joint where the talus is driven into the tibia, often shattering due to high energy impacts like falls or car accidents. Accounting for only 1% of all lower limb breaks, these fractures are complex to fix, and in the worst cases, complications can be so severe that amputation is required.
The biggest concern, I think, for the surgeons at that point was that my injuries my fractures were compound. So the bones in my right leg had torn through the back of my calf, and now my leg bones were exposed, and I had a big open wound on the back of my right calf that was contaminated with dirt and mud from the crag, and so the worry was infection. Up until the hospital, I can honestly say that I didn't feel any pain, but because my wounds were contaminated, they needed a washout and like an irrigation. They needed cleaning to get all of the gunk out of them, and that was when the pain arrived. And then it didn't really leave for like 2 months. So that night I went in for an emergency surgery, and when I woke from that, the surgeons explained to me that they'd placed an external fixation frame thing, which is basically like an external metal frame that they drill into your leg bones to kind of hold everything together, and it's a temporary measure just to stabilize like the injury until they can do something more comprehensive and reconstructive. So for the next 2 weeks I was in the X-Fix awaiting a more comprehensive, like final, what we hoped would be my final surgery. And that was the start of my stint in hospital. I didn't leave that bed or that room or that hospital for nearly a month. Luckily, Nathan was able to be with me for most of that, so he slept on a little pull-out camp bed in my hospital room, and I don't know what I would have done had it not been that way. I feel like the shock and the trauma of a big injury like that would have just been completely overwhelming. And then 2.5 weeks later, I had an ORIF surgery, which is an open reduction and internal fixation. Basically, what that surgery involves is plates, screws, bolts, I'm not sure in which combination, to reconstruct your leg, but then also a titanium rod pushed from your knee to your ankle to provide support. I think before that surgery was the first time that it really hit me, the mess that I had made of my leg, because my surgeon ran me through what that surgery involved, and he ran me through the risks, and he ran me through the likelihood of complication and what that could mean for salvaging my leg or not salvaging my leg. He also ran me through the risks of not being able to return to climbing to full function. And before this surgery was also the first time that I learned that I was missing bone. When my leg bones came out of the back of my calf, I had straight up left some bone at the crag. But they'd also, in the first surgeries, had to remove a lot of non-viable splintered bone where it had been contaminated or it was splintered, too far gone. And that left me with a problem for returning to sport and avoiding a permanent disability. Your body's apparently very good at growing back bone, but bone gaps are a big problem because there's only so much bone that your body can grow back by itself. But I think the most significant part to capture for me of that time was by far the emotional impact and the isolation and being scared and being sad and grieving for this fully functional version of myself. I actually wrote some journal entries from the hospital, which I feel would probably capture the vibe a little better than me just recounting it now. So I wrote, I wanted to start writing about my experience in the aftermath of a climbing accident, but in the acute stages of surgeries and processing the trauma of falling, I haven't felt up to it. It's been nearly 3 weeks since my accident now, and with luck on my side, I'll leave hospital tomorrow. There's still so much left unprocessed in my mind, and I hope writing my thoughts down will help me to sort through my feelings and connect me to something creative in a time where I feel like I've lost so much of what makes me, me. After my fall, there's not much I can do for myself. Physically, I'm groggy and tired and fragile. I have broken bones and wounds that need to heal. I can't weight my leg, sit up unassisted, go to the toilet by myself, or eat without feeling sick. My nerves remind me tirelessly that they're not happy. Neuropathic pain is so bizarre and so tiring, but I hope the worst of the post-surgery pain has passed. My mind has been working overtime, remembering the day and the fall. I wonder if the shock of the accident is beginning to calcify into something less easily shaken. I cry often without really knowing why. These weeks in hospital have been some of the toughest of my life, but the weather has been so beautiful these past couple of days, and yesterday I was allowed outside into the courtyard, my first time outside in 2.5 weeks. Feeling the warmth of the Californian sunshine on my skin, hearing the birds, and squinting in the sunlight like a prehistoric cave creature was the most healing medicine of all. I felt very grateful to be free of the air conditioning, disconnected from my cannula, and away from the smell of untouched hospital food. During those weeks in the hospital, I think even though they were so difficult and scary and rubbish and horrible, and I wouldn't relive them if you paid me a good amount of money, I almost had this kind of stoic mindset, and I almost felt more accepting during that time when everything was just so raw and such a whirlwind. I feel I kind of made back steps once I got home, whereas those first few weeks in hospital were just a lot of firefighting and a lot of taking things in the moment, and kind of felt like a twig in a very fast flowing stream. You don't get a whole lot of choice in the matter, whereas when the dust began to settle a little bit when I got home and I was faced with more surgical options and I guess like the consequences of, or like the ramifications of my injury, things began to get quite a bit harder. A month after my accident, I was able to fly home, and that was like a whole saga, as you can imagine, trying to get on a plane with that situation. It's a 12-hour flight, but getting home really felt like the closing of a really surreal and horrible chapter where I felt I had very little control over anything. Life had flipped upside down. It's been nearly 3 months since I had my accident, and I am adjusting to a new way of life. It's really nice to be out of the hospital, and I have some impressive scars, and honestly one big main focus, and that's getting back to climbing. Some people never learn, right? I think I've had a lot of people look at me very strangely when they ask if I'm going to go back to climbing, and my answer is a resounding yes, if I'm able to. What I thought would be quite nice to share is an anecdote that I have from coming round from my first surgery and remembering that my shoe had to be cut off my foot, and prioritising reaching out to our friend Phil at Mad Rock to order a replacement pair of shoes.
Hey Phil, this is going to be the weirdest message, but Nathan's an XL in t-shirts and I'm probably like a medium, depending on how baggy the fit is. But thanks so much for the t-shirts and for context as to why I sound like not quite myself. I'm actually in the hospital with an open break. Well, it's not open anymore. And it's rough. Also, I'm probably going to need some new D2 ones because they had to cut them off my feet, which is the real tragedy.
It was a matter of urgency for me to make sure that I had a replacement pair of shoes. So yeah, I guess like from the accident, the focus has always been like getting back to climbing. What's actually quite nice is that they did send me a replacement pair of D2 ones and now they're sat on my bedside table. When I got home, we thought that I'd had my last surgery, and that was going to kind of be like the beginning of my like true recovery, my road back to climbing, and that my leg would heal slowly but in time and fully. And unfortunately, that's not been the case so far. There's like a whole up and down journey that's been going on behind the scenes, which I really do want to share the details of here, kind of like as they happen. In talking about this project, Mammut have really helped me to see and appreciate that it is these parts of your climbing life and your climbing story that help to define your perspective on that thing that you love and risk, and what it is about climbing that makes it worth it. Even though it hurt me so badly, my like appreciation for climbing and my focus for climbing has never been stronger or clearer, even though I wouldn't have chosen it this way, and this isn't a story that I wanted to tell or planned to tell. I guess the silver lining is I am so excited. I've never been more excited to wearing a fresh pair of climbing shoes. I've never been more excited to project the easiest circuit at my gym. I've never been more excited to climb my first V0, my first V1, my first V2, and hopefully upwards. And I am genuinely excited to share that process and that journey here with you. So a huge thank you to Mammut for helping me and supporting me to tell the story. I hope that you found it somewhat interesting, and I will see you in the next stage of my recovery journey.